Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
I'm going to describe the thesis that I argued in my journal piece and not argued last night, so that those of you who haven't watched the lecture or read the piece, you kind of know what we're talking about. So, in essence, what I argue is that there are three fundamental sources of power in society, social power. They are hierarchical authority, which is the state and experts, people who have the right or think they've got the right to tell us what to do. Social solidarity, which are the things we do because we feel we're part of a group of whom we share values and responsibilities, and individual aspiration, which is self-explanatory. And what I argue is that when it comes to complex problems, we need to mobilize all three of those sources of social power. We need to mobilize authority, we need to mobilize solidarity, we need to mobilize individual aspiration. We have to put them together. I argue that the problem with modern Britain and other societies, I think it's just as true of America, is that hierarchy is under attack. Levels of trust in authority are very, very low in politics, but in all forms of expertise, within all sorts of failures of hierarchy. Solidarity has also been undermined by things which are very good things in the world, social diversity, mobility, but also by the fracturing of class, so there isn't as much solidarity. What has happened, therefore, is individualism has grown hubristically to fill the space, and so we are, as a society, dominated by a kind of individualistic perspective, plus the fourth view of change, which is mere fatalism, which is the idea we can't make change happen. What we have to do is not only have solutions which combine individualism, hierarchy, and solidarity, but we have to renew hierarchy, which is, I guess, the big question for these three brilliant people, which is how is it we renew authority? What was interesting about the Olympics was that it was brilliantly organised. And why was it brilliantly organised? Because once we won the bid, we just had to do it. And it didn't matter what newspaper campaigns were run, it didn't matter what local groups were set up, we had to have the special lanes, we had to have the bill. It all just had, how do we ever have the authority to have that kind of willingness to say, okay, we've made a commitment, we're going to do it? So, and how do we also renew solidarity in our society so that we can start to have solutions which combine these three powers rather than ones which are too reliant on one particular perspective? So that's my basic argument. And we're going to Tristram first for your kind of thoughts on this thesis.
Actually now, the shadow of the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of the Berlin Wall, actually ideas on the left which have a precursor to the 20th century in terms of different models of political economy are coming alive again, free of the burden of the 20th century history of them. So that is exciting, it seems to me. And we've seen that just in raw terms over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of the flourishing of the success of the cooperative movement. A lot of these models of political economy have done spectacularly well. Not spectacularly well. They have done better during the downturn than your traditional model of shareholder capitalism. So things are occurring in the undergrowth that are interesting. Obviously, by statute, at an event like this, one has to mention the Olympics. And Matthew has been right to highlight it as a good example of a policy that brings together the nexus of power sources. I think one thing he misses out in one manner is excellence and the importance of excellence in the Olympics and a raw pride in excellence, going from the sporting provision to actually the management of the process, and how each source of power is dependent on the other's concurrent excellence. And there was a sort of elite nexus within that provision, which again seems to me an interesting moment, both for the sort of British psyche and also how we think about power. The voluntarism, the social solidarity that we saw on show seemed to be a remarkable counterblast to everything we've been told over the last 10 to 15 years. But we're also right to appreciate this question of politics in terms of everything Matthew's said, in terms of the participative process. The collapse of social class, the collapse of traditional employment structures. It seems to me, above all, the collapse of organised religion. And, when you look at the decrease in political party membership, you can trace it seems to me, almost mirror image to the collapse of participation in organised religion. People stop going to church, they stop going to political parties. The problem for political parties is as they seek to open themselves up, they inherently come up against the problems of the constitutionalism of their organisations. We want you to vote, for the leader of the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or whatever, but actually there's also, if you're going to do that, you also technically need to be a member having paid your subs because someone else has paid their... How you marry those two processes is a real challenge, and no political party above the sort of surges we get now and again seems to have cracked that. I think all parties are to blame in terms of tuition fees. Labour Party as much as anyone else. Saying in the 01 election, whatever it was, we will never introduce tuition fees, and then actually legislating for tuition fees, which wouldn't necessarily begin within the Parliament, but you were doing it anyway. The Liberal Democrats saying we're never going to put them up, and then voting for 9,000. That is not how public policy should be approached, and you can understand, I think, hostility and scepticism about the political process. I don't like fixed-term parliaments. We now have a parliament of 5 years, 3 months, which is the longest in the world outside Rwanda. And I think not having the democracy, not having the call of accountability, doesn't necessarily bring you the right policies. Finally, I would say that what progressive politics entails in terms of a social redistributive progressive agenda seems to me how you revive politics. You have a platform, you build consensus, you work to deliver it, and you tell people you have delivered it.
I think if we're going to address this issue of trust and power, particularly when it comes to the hierarchies, of which the media is quite an important one, we have to think about this. We have to think about language, and we have to think about whether communication is actually happening or not. There was a very interesting poll yesterday which showed that young people's definition of morality has sort of retreated into being about taking care of your own family. Whether you should participate in wider society, whether it's community involvement, whether it's religion, whether it's paying your taxes to participate in society, these all score incredibly low. But taking care of your own family is the overwhelming top priority when it comes to living a modern life, according to this group of 16 to 24-year-olds. I think that's very interesting. I think that we have to address two things: ignorance and lack of understanding. Unless it's somebody's hobby to follow what I think's become a sort of soap opera of politics, people just don't understand what's going on in politics at all. And then secondly, if they do become interested, if an issue affects them nearly or comes into the news spotlight in such a way that it engages their interest, they quickly disengage again because of the nature of the language and the discourse and the tone of the argument, which they find so off-putting. The media, of which I am a part, and so I take responsibility, and I'm trying to do something about it with my current project of News for Teenagers, has become far too accustomed with this idea of blending news and comment, which hampers understanding, it hampers the communication of knowledge, and there is a dearth of analysis and explanation. Without communication and without knowledge and understanding, so through these two worlds of education and the media, there's actually no chance of ensuring that you have understanding and then consent for the things that you want to do. Consent is the basis of anything that we want to do to change any of these things or tackle any of these challenges. But I do want to talk about this idea of solidarity and individualism a bit, because all of these ideas, like the big society, like building collective structures, they sound rather threatening, actually. I don't want to be on the rota to do flower arranging at my local church. And that's what it sounds like to me. And I think that you can't get rid of individualism. You sort of have to do business with the change that has happened in people's expectations. And I don't think that they're sinister. And I think that the language of virtue is not necessarily unproblematic when you talk about these things. You know, we're not all sort of Ayn Rand solipsists if we like to buy shoes, I think is my point. And since the whole female population has now tasted liberty, it's going to be quite difficult to convince us that the path of virtue is one that we want to follow. And also fatalism. I think this is really, really interesting, partly because I know a lot of people who are involved in the green movement. All you get is things that increase your sense of fatalism. You're told that your own behaviour is shameful, really, and again, not virtuous because you're not helping. I think the Green Movement, for example, should talk about the fact that when they discovered that the ozone layer was being killed by the CFCs in the fridges and the aerosols, they stopped using the CFCs and then the ozone layer mended itself. Why not talk about that? You know, that's sort of motivating positive psychology. I think there's a really important role for positive psychology in all of this meeting of the large challenges. So I suppose to conclude, it's a very interesting question whether the political structures and methods are up to the current enormous challenges that politics faces. But I also think that we should think about whether our methods of spreading knowledge and understanding are up to the challenge. And it's difficult because the political classes like to talk to each other. We all love panels. And we all love late night broadcasts where we tear strips off each other. But actually the audience is declining and isn't happy with us, so we have to face up to that reality.
Brilliant, thank you.
I mean, it's actually quite easy to construct a story on which politicians are entirely blameless. There's an asymmetry of distrust. They're struggling in an extraordinarily complex environment. It's very easy to find fault with any institutions. The more you democratize institutions, the more you open them up, the more fault can be found. We have a muckraking media. These poor people are Horatios on the bridge, holding the hordes at bay, and they deserve our pity. But I would feel more sympathetic to that view if we hadn't had such trust-sapping initiatives as the Iraq War. Now, it's absolutely right to celebrate what you might call the achievements of liberal individualism. I mean, Miranda's done it beautifully. I mean, who would want to return to the position of women even 30 years ago, let alone 200 years ago, when the Enlightenment was starting to take effect, as it were, in our politics? Answer, no one. We're all much, I think, better off, and I don't know if we're happy or not, but we certainly deserve to be for the achievements of liberal individualism, for free markets, and for democracy. But there are lots of buts, and there is a pathology of individualism which goes with it, and we have to be aware of what that is, because it's really hurting us now. If you look at the behavioral economics of this, you'll see that there's an effect which is called money priming. Okay, money priming is when I tell you something about money, and that makes you greedier. Okay, or more selfish. Okay, we see it in tons of experiments. Here's a simple one. You're doing something, and while you're doing it, the experimenter just happens to, and there's some images of money in front of you, and they're not in the control case. And while you're doing it, the experimenter inadvertently drops some pencils next to you. And the test is, how many pencils do you pick up? Okay, once you've seen a lot of images of money, you don't pick up as many pencils. Okay, it's true. You sit further away from other people. You're more selfish. Okay, you're more individualized. Okay, there's lots and lots of evidence for this. So what might then the effect be on a society which is pervaded by money imagery? Answer, I think, and I worry, increased selfishness. And I also worry that what goes with it is a kind of Enlightenment overbelief in expertise, which actually rather subtly reinforces authority beyond its deserts, and a kind of arrogance in government that goes with that. And I think the counterpart of those things is what we need to be exploring. I think that's where the really interesting moment comes, and David Goodhart's called it post-liberalism, and you can call it that if you like. I have another word for it, which is the word conservatism, but not as you know it. What would that look like? Well, it would look like a variety of things. First of all, it has a different idea of the individual. Right, so the individual is not the atom. It's not the core word of the meaning of the word individual. Is that which cannot be divided. It's what is explanatory, basic, and a theory. It's not treating individuals as atoms. It's treating them as it were, points within a network. And society becomes not an agglomeration of individuals, a purely nominalistic conception of society. It becomes a set of relationships. And you start thinking of individuals as social as Aristotelian social selves, defined by how they link with other people. And when you take that view, then you start to see individuals as creatures not of incentive, that's barbaric, liberal, individualist economics speaking, but as creatures of habit. Now, when you get something like creatures of habit, you have a completely different conception of a human being, far more interesting, and one that we've hardly begun to engage with in politics. And the reason why the Olympics is so fascinating is because it felt like a moment where society took a large number of people and either gave them permission or changed their habits for a period. And the result was colossal joy. As Boris said, people started spontaneously talking to each other on public transport, and other miracles took place. What else can we do? I think we should stop fetishizing the USA. I don't know. I had this experience you may have seen recently with the House of Lords, and the staggering number of people who came up to me and said, well, of course, we've got to make it like a Senate. We said, oh, you mean right, with all the corruption, cronyism, lobbying, and special interests of an absence of legislation of Capitol Hill. That's a great idea. I'm thrilled by that possibility. That would be throw out vast chunks of our historical baby with the bathwater. Two quick further thoughts. One is we'd give up the idea of popular sovereignty. We've never been a country which has had popular sovereignty. We have parliamentary sovereignty. The reason we have parliamentary sovereignty is because we love them to bits, but the people don't always know what is right. And they don't always know what's in their best interest. It sounds horribly patronising to say it, but British government has been based on that system for 400 years. And I think it should remain, if not exactly the same, then we should bear some respect for that position. Final thing is... last one thing very quickly is British exceptionalism. Let's get back to what was so stunning about Britain. The Olympics was, it's a celebration, it's a distinctively British celebration in many ways, about a bunch of sports which we had a large hand in creating and codifying, and which celebrated in its opening ceremony British exceptionalism. We don't have to be arrogant. I'm the last person in the world to preach a philosophy of arrogance, but I do think we should be self-confident about what is so good about our system and not apologising for it, and that goes with not fetishizing the US. Thank you very much indeed.
One particular problem in relation to the nature of the hierarchy, it seems to me, which connects to this institutional difficulty, is the fact that our politicians spend far too much time worrying about their parties and far too little time worrying about the public. And do we have a particularly acute problem now about small, shrinking, unrepresentative parties still having a stranglehold over our politicians and their freedom to think in the expansive ways all three of you have talked today?
You work for Tony Blair. He had a sort of interesting relationship with the Labour Party and the Labour movement, which was not necessarily so dependent upon it. When leaders feel fragile and worried, they drill down into their base. And what we're beginning to sort of realise on the Labour benches is the sort of precariousness of the position of the Prime Minister relative to his own party.
Miranda, what do you think?
I think that when Matthew referred earlier to the idea of leadership, I think that this is absolutely crucial, because what people actually want is they want strategy, not tactics, from a leader. And the problem with this sort of short-termism, this tactical thinking, which is again to do with an argumentative discourse and a sort of constant bickering, rather than articulating any sort of hopeful vision. I think that's what people want from leadership, but it takes maturity, and it's very, very difficult to do.